We're going to hear about a different topic, one that perhaps we've not thought about or heard about in connection with the Vietnam War, from Group Captain retired David Richardson, CSC. He's the son of an RAF wartime engine fitter. He joined his school's Air Training Corps and subsequently gained degrees in engineering in London and Nottingham. He joined the RAAF in 1978 as an engineering officer. And at Richmond, his postings were at every rank from pilot officer to group captain, delivering maintenance support to the transport fleet, particularly the Hercules and the Boeing 707s. He's held 2 commands, including the CO of number 486 Maintenance Squadron and the OC Lift Systems Program. So after 29 years as a member of the permanent RAAF, he transferred to the reserves, where he spent almost 10 years as the Director of Air Force Heritage, and then the Office of Air Force History for 5 years to manage and to help write the 600-page book, Aircraft of the RAAF, which was released in 2021 as part of the celebrations for the RAAF centenary. His particular interest is in transport aircraft that are modified for special operations, reconnaissance and electronic warfare, but I can't see the word drone anywhere on your CV as yet. He's got a really interesting topic to talk about this afternoon, and it's the Son Tay prison raid. Let's welcome David.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is David Richardson. I'd like to speak to you about the Son Tay prison raid on the 21st of November 1970, which aimed to release and repatriate up to 60 US prisoners of war believed to be held at the Son Tay prison camp just northwest of Hanoi. This raid achieved notoriety for the fact that, while boldly planned and flawlessly executed, it failed in its primary goal. The raiders returned empty-handed. The POWs had been moved out by the North Vietnamese the previous July while the prison was being upgraded. In Washington, there was an outbreak of media frenzy and political scapegoating. How on earth could the US intelligence community get it so wrong? Was there a security leak? Was it just a politically motivated stunt, unnecessarily putting US servicemen's lives at risk? Some official details of the raid were published soon after, and some personal accounts have circulated within specialist media, a few books and veterans associations. But the story of the raid, its planning, training, execution and legacy deserves wider dissemination. I'm very grateful to have the chance to place the Son Tay raid on the agenda for this conference, and I hope this presentation will perhaps help do justice to those remarkable men who raided Son Tay over 55 years ago. I plan to take you through the historical context, the planning, the training, the execution, the outcomes and some evaluation of the raid. And my qualifications for this, well, you know, apart from being a mad C-130 fan, I think we've got one of them. I recognise that I fail miserably to compare with the previous group of illustrious speakers who've been at this podium. I'm an amateur aviation researcher and writer, but I have had many years on providing support to the C-130 fleet. I've long held an admiration for the USAF's Combat Talon Special Operations Hercs, and for the last 4 years I've been researching the details of the 2 early Talon C-130s, which were vital for the Son Tay raid. It was the courage and airmanship shown by these crews that really piqued my interest. In 1985, at an air show in the UK, I had my photo taken in front of the Combat Talon. Yes, I know, we all grow older, don't we? It was unknown to me at the time, but almost 40 years later, I discovered that this very aircraft, serial 0523, was the lead C-130 on the Son Tay raid. I felt sure then that it was my destiny to fully uncover the story. My searches involved semi-official histories, published articles and personal accounts from USAF servicemen who were involved in planning and flying the raid. Quite a few resources, but I should say any errors of fact or interpretation are mine. So, setting the scene. By early 1970, the Nixon administration's conduct of the war in Vietnam had fueled intense domestic unrest in the US. The US had names of over 500 prisoners of war held in North Vietnam, mostly aircrew, some held since 1964. There was intense concern that while North Vietnam sought world sympathy by parading apparently well-fed POWs in public, the truth was that many were being held in despicable conditions, suffering malnutrition and torture. These concerns were not unfounded. Post-war statistics showed that 1 in 7 US POWs died in North Vietnamese captivity. The US was also dismayed at the slow pace of the Paris peace talks with North Vietnam, and the US was anxious to raise the plight of the POWs as a lever. What better voice than that of a released POW? In Washington, all agreed something had to be done about the POWs. Son Tay itself had long been identified as a prisoner of war camp of significant capacity. By May 1970, US intelligence suggested that there were around 60 POWs at the camp. The camp itself is... No, well, it's just to the left of centre of the slide. A feasibility study predicted there are 2 windows of opportunity in late October and November 1970, which offered reasonable chance of favourable weather and moonlight for a night raid. In August, the US launched detailed organisation, planning and training for an airborne raid on the Son Tay prison. Since the halt of the US bombing of North Vietnam in November 1968, intended to encourage the North Vietnamese to engage in peace talks, the North had taken advantage of the halt to further boost their air defences. Indeed, by late 1970, Hanoi was regarded as the world's most heavily defended region against air attack. Son Tay is barely 37 kilometres northwest of Hanoi, well inside that defended airspace. Noting the air defences and the threat of an estimated 12,000 North Vietnamese troops within 15 minutes drive of Son Tay prison, the planning team developed a bold plan to insert an Army Green Beret assault force by US Air Force MHHV Super Jolly Green Giant helicopters. These big beasts. They can carry up to 60 people each. This offered the best option for a surprise arrival and a successful extraction of the POWs, supported by US Air Force A-1E Sky Raiders. However, for the assault force to have any chance of success and survival, a very low-level, undetected insertion and extraction by night would be required. Remember, this was 1970, when virtually none of the US combat aircraft were fitted with the sophisticated avionics equipment that we now accept as standard and necessary for safe, undetected, low-level navigation at night. The USAF helicopters would need a pathfinder to lead them to the target. The solution was my favourite, the USAF C-130 combat Talons. It's an unusual looking beast, as you can see if you take a look. They're fitted with highly specialised terrain-following radar in the deeper nose, navigation equipment, radar warning receivers and electronic countermeasures, and crewed by specialists with the required planning and flying skills to make undetected clandestine penetrations into North Vietnam at night. And they've done this for 4 years without a single shoot-down. Seeking a backup for every eventuality, the planners sought 2 of the Talons. The second Talon would lead the strike formation of Sky Raiders, and each Talon crew would be able to lead either formation in the event that one fell unserviceable. The mix of types chosen was no accident. The HH-53 and the A-1E Sky Raider crews had many years of cooperating as the USAF's Combat Search and Rescue, or CSAR, force over Vietnam, although so far they'd only conducted CSAR operations in daylight. Analysts estimated that the Green Berets had but 60 seconds to eliminate all the prison guards if they were to prevent the guards from killing the POWs. To ensure the necessary shock and awe to achieve this criterion, the planners chose to insert an initial 13-man assault force by the deliberate landing of a UH-1H Iroquois helicopter inside the prison compound. And we've heard before that 13 might be rather more than you want to try and squeeze into an airline. We'll come to this a bit later. This initial assault force would be equipped to eliminate the guards, break into the cells and blow a hole in the prison wall. A significantly larger main force of 44 men would be landed by 2 more HH-53s outside the prison walls to help secure the evacuation area by eliminating any Vietnamese opposition in the prison barracks or through reinforcements from local barracks. 1 more HH-53 gunship would silence the gun towers on the prison walls. 2 more empty HH-53s would stand by to evacuate the POWs. And the A-1 Sky Raiders would circle nearby, ready to provide close air support as required. All 3 types would take off from separate bases in Thailand and head northeast over Laos to rendezvous at the North Vietnamese border. This is very simplified, but you can see Hanoi and Haiphong up there with the red and the blue beam, one talon leading the helicopters and 1 talon leading the Sky Raiders. The helicopters would require in-flight refuelling at night, another new skill to pick up, from an HC-130P tanker, while overlaps in order to get to Son Tay and have enough fuel then to make it back to the border. From the North Vietnamese border, the combat talons would take up their role as pathfinders as ever over enemy territory. In terms of rehearsals, or in preparing for rehearsals and refinements of the plan, the USAF sought experienced crews from all of its existing special ops units worldwide, while the Green Berets were personally picked by their 3 element commanders. All participants assembled at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, where in great secrecy an intensive period of training and rehearsals began, involving both the air and ground forces together. Training flights started at Eglin, and after ranging across the southeast of the continental USA to replicate the length of the mission to and from Son Tay, they finished with the Green Berets conducting a practice assault, sorry, I should say to Son Tay, not that, but yes, after replicating the length of the mission to Son Tay, they would finish up with the Green Berets conducting a practice assault on a prison compound mock-up, which is not easy to see there, but it is basically vertical poles with lengths of Hessian strung between them. The prison compound played an extraordinary significant role in the training. The night attack plan required new air and ground tactics to be developed and then exercised and adjusted repeatedly. Each member of the Green Berets was assigned an individual task and given specific weapons for attacking a certain building or target. To further enhance their night firing skills, and in a first for the time, as I understand it, they purchased and fitted commercially available single-point red dot sighting systems, which considerably facilitated quick and accurate fire at night. Noting that the modern terms gender equity and DEI were entirely unknown in 1970, it may come as no surprise that only 1 female featured in the Son Tay raid. Barbara was a CIA asset, but as the sole female, she did play a vital role. Barbara was in fact the code name for a CIA-built scale model of the Son Tay prison compound. Painstakingly built using aerial photographs, Barbara provided very realistic and vital training, and was vital for the training. In these days where virtual reality can offer us a visual experience of almost anything you can imagine, it's a delight to note that the CIA not only built the model, but they developed the use of prism sights to enable the Green Berets to look down and then along, so they could view the prison compound as if at ground level, even though it was a scale model. It's a further delight to recount the story that during the actual attack at Son Tay, 1 Green Beret noted a bicycle leaning against the wall of the prison, just as he'd seen it on the model. Formation flying with dissimilar aircraft started in daylight before progressing to nighttime formations. Procedures for this dissimilar formation flying did not exist when they had to be devised from scratch, particularly for the helicopters. Formation flying in a C-130 with the 5 Sky Raiders at 145 knots was quite reasonably comfortable for both the Hercules and for the Sky Raiders. provided the C-130 made only gentle heading changes to avoid losing the formation. Interestingly, here on the let's see if I can do this again, but it's on the centre section above the wing, above the fuselage, where the wing and the fuselage cross over, you can see a couple of light rectangles and two small ones either side. That's six lights that were scabbed onto the top of the wing to enable the formation aircraft, the following aircraft, to keep in formation. The Iroquois, so while the Hercules and the Sky Raiders could move along reasonably comfortably at 145 knots, the Iroquois could only just manage 105 knots cruising speed, and that was only if it was positioned close behind and above the C-130's wingtip, enjoying about 20 knots worth of free ride through drafting in the C-130 slipstream. To achieve that, to come down to that 105 knots, the C-130 had to deploy 70 degrees of flap and fly 10 degrees nose up at only 10 knots above their stalling speed and indeed below their normal touchdown speed for landing. So they were both, well, the crews joked that both the C-130 and the Iroquois experienced buffeting, or the burble as the Americans call it. The Iroquois because it was flying faster than allowed in the flight manual, and the C-130 of course because it was flying slower. The rehearsals resulted in continual evolution of the attack plan, both talents trained to be able to lead either the helicopters or the Sky Raiders. The original plan to land the UH-1 Iroquois in the prison compound lasted no longer than the first practice. The Huey was just too cramped for the required number of Green Berets, leaving them in no condition to fight effectively. The Iroquois was replaced with an HH-3 Jolly Green Giant, which was replaced with an HH Jolly. Oh, sorry, I should have had that up. I'll just show you how the formation was being flown, with each group of aircraft staggered off diagonally out from each wingtip. The Iroquois was replaced with an HH-3 Jolly Green Giant, a veteran seaside helicopter type, which was just being withdrawn from Vietnam and replaced by the larger HH-53, which was going to be used for the rest of the raid. The HH-3 could still only manage 105 knots, but its larger rotor diameter meant that the blades would undoubtedly hit trees in the prison compound, leading not so much to a quick landing as a forced landing or a crash landing, surely rendering the aircraft unflyable. It was fitted with mattresses to protect the Green Berets on board during the crash landing. How very considerate of the Air Force. The very high angle of attack required for the C-130 to achieve that low speed meant that their terrain-following radar was ineffectual. With the nose so high, the radar could not tilt down far enough to actually see any ground at all. So the Sonte talents were able to employ the only two examples of a very early generation Texas Instruments forward-looking infrared or FLIR, which was fitted in the nose of their standard underwing fuel tank. While still in its developmental stages, this FLIR proved vital for the success of the Sonte mission, being very effective over jungle and enabling the aircrew to identify vital navigation waypoints en route to Sonte. There's an interesting link between that FLIR and a top secret CIA action into deep into China, but we'll talk about that later this time. In the last month or so before the raid, intelligence operatives were starting to note a reduction in activity in and around Sonte prison, leading to some concern that some or all of the POWs may have been moved. Fearful of giving away the raid through more overhead photographic activity, they decided on a quick and covert ground recce of the prison complex just 72 hours before the raid. The recce team was able to visually confirm such details of the site as had been gleaned from photographs taken by SR-71s and unmanned drones. They confirmed the presence of North Vietnamese regulars at the prison, but they could not see over the walls to confirm or deny the presence of POWs. But this recce team also verified the presence of large numbers of North Vietnamese and Chinese North Vietnamese troops and Chinese advisors in a separate facility which was located just 400 metres south of the prison. We go back to this picture again. The old prison is just off the bottom right-hand corner of that picture. It's about 400 metres, as I said. The plan was had identified this as having previously been a secondary school, but they identified it equally then as a valid target for the Sky Raiders. The ground recce confirmed that it was most definitely a military installation with large numbers of troops there, well armed and motorised. Unfortunately, the school could be easily confused with the nearby Son Tay prison. The raiders had been warned of this possibility, but even so, misidentification of the school caused the only deviation from the carefully planned and rehearsed raid, and we'll cover a bit of that later. Moving on to final approval and execution, by mid-November 1970, with over 1,000 flying hours expended and 170 mock attacks undertaken. Now just digest those figures. 1,000 flying hours and 170 Green Beret mock attacks on the mock-up of this. The assault force was finally ready. While they realised they would be assaulting a building, probably to rescue hostages, they still had no idea of the actual target or even the broad location, whether in the Middle East or in Europe or Southeast Asia. They deployed to Thailand just as the raid was brought forward by 24 hours because Cyclone Patsy was heading to Vietnam. And only hours before the raid, the Green Berets were advised of the actual target. And the stories all tell you that the Green Berets broke into spontaneous applause when they heard what they were going to do. President Nixon was made aware that there was some doubt about whether the POWs were still at the prison, but he gave the final go-ahead for the raid. Still in existence is a handwritten note in which he accepted full responsibility for authorising the mission, even if it were to be unsuccessful. The attack was timed for 02:15 hours local time, 15 minutes after the shift change of the prison guards. The outgoing shift would have disarmed while the new shift would still be settling in. The 13 aircraft of the raiding force departed from 3 Royal Thai Air Force bases for a flight of 3 hours each way to and from the target. The assault formation, comprising 5 of the HH-53s and a sole HH-3 helicopter, was led by Talon's serial number 0523, that's the one in my photo. The strike formation of 5 A1E Sky Raiders was led by the other. The call signs, now I'm going to list the call signs only because we'll be talking about some of them individually later. Cherry was the call sign for the combat Talons, Apple for the HH-53s, Banana for the single HH-3, and Peaches for the Sky Raiders. Perhaps inevitably the whole formation was known as the Fruit Salad. 59 US Navy aircraft were tasked to mount a diversionary feint on Haiphong further to the east from Hanoi to distract the anti-aircraft and SAM defences away from the raiders just at the right time as they approached out of the hills and the mountains to the west. The Navy had a thankless task in that they were allowed to drop only flares rather than live weapons because the President would not relax the bombing rule. Nearly 30 USAF aircraft provided additional support and protection for the assault formation, including F-4 Phantoms for air-to-air defence, F-105G Wild Weasels for anti-missile systems, KC-135 and XC-130B tankers, they were all on there, EC-121 AWACS and RC-135 SIGINT aircraft. The Phantoms and Weasels were authorised to carry live weapons to defend the raiders if required. This was the largest night air action over North Vietnam of the entire war up to that point, involving a total of 116 aircraft. The balance slightly in favour of the US Navy, as it happened, but operating either directly in the action or in support. Okay, we're over the target. It's 02:15 and 3.5 miles from the target. Cherry 01 breaks radio silence to pass the required compass heading for the helicopters to take them to the target. Cherry 01 then climbs, heads directly towards the target while the helicopters continue unguided. Unknowingly, they are drifting a little too far south to the right of their intended track. The Sky Raiders disperse to circle in groups nearby until the attack starts. At 2:17 AM, Cherry 01 is at 1,500 feet where it drops, or from where it drops, illuminating flares directly over the target prison compound. It's H hour and all hell is about to break loose in Sonte. But the helicopter force has drifted almost 400 metres south from where it should be. This is unashamedly stolen from a book on the raid, but the upper line on the lower diagram there shows where they should have been heading to go right over the camp. The helicopters were in fact heading for the secondary, or closer to the secondary school, down on the bottom there, bottom right-hand corner. With the illumination provided by Cherry 01's flares, Apple 02 recognises their navigation error and makes a sharp left turn to the north, followed by Apple 03, which is the gunship, and Banana 01, the one that will be crash landing. A right turn then brings them, as you can see, back over the prison as planned. However, Apple 01 fails to notice the turn of the other helicopters in the dark, mistakes the secondary school for the prison, and lands right beside it. At the prison, Apple 03 flares over the compound, intense fire from its three multi-fire miniguns utterly destroys the guard quarters and the two guard towers on the corners of the prison compound and eliminating them as a threat. Banana 01 executes its planned crash landing into the prison compound, but lands rather harder than expected. It seems that the trees were actually taller than the photographs suggested, than the intelligence people had suggested. So yes, lands rather harder than expected. Thank God for the mattresses. The 13-man crew assault on board, exits the wreck, and engages the enemy at point-blank range, quickly eliminating the guards. With Apple 01, which was carrying the raid commander, having landed next to the secondary school, its force of 22 Green Berets quickly engaged the surprised enemy forces in a furious firefight. The enemy are taller, stockier, and not wearing the usual North Vietnamese fatigues. Indeed, most sources suggest unofficially that these would have been Chinese advisors who were there specifically to help the North Vietnamese, to train the North Vietnamese to help find the many US special forces that were operating in small numbers and gathering intelligence. But anyway, yes, they were not wearing the usual North Vietnamese fatigues. The Green Berets quickly realised their mistake in their location, but of course they need to eliminate the threat from the enemy before calling back Apple 01 to pick them up. They withdraw successfully after 9 minutes, leaving perhaps 200 dead or wounded, but without a single loss to themselves. And Apple 01 lands there next to the prison where they attack other objectives as previously. At the prison, the deputy raid commander in Apple 02 has realised Apple 01's mistake, and he seamlessly assumes command of the attack as per the agreed contingency plan. His 22 Green Berets on board support the force from Banana 01, and they also destroy other specific targets in and around the prison. The Sky Raiders destroy nearby river bridges and highways in order to impede the progress of any reinforcements. Cherry 01 and 2 drop napalm flares and firecracker battle simulators on a bridge and highway intersection some distance away from the prison to confuse, distract and perhaps delay any enemy reinforcements. Although one of the napalm bombs does hang up for a while, which causes some anxious moments. But proud of their first ever live drop of napalm from the USAF C-130, some of Cherry 01's crew later purchased themselves USAF bomb units. Always unusual in a transport crew. Apple 04 and 5 hold with rotors turning on a lake island 7 miles to the west. Look, it's out to the top left-hand corner there. They're waiting to be called in to extract prisoners. They carry medical supplies to deal with POWs who may be dazed, confused, injured, or simply too weak to walk. However, after 10 minutes, the Deputy Raid Commander advises that no prisoners have been found in any of the building rooms, and he orders the extraction of the assault force. 1 and 2 are brought into a makeshift landing zone near the compound. Extraction is orderly and is complete by HR plus 27 minutes. I guess that's one crowded half hour. Banana 01 is destroyed with a charge as they depart. Quite effectively by the looks. During the extraction of the assault force, Cherry 01 flies to the Laos border where the crew activates a homing beacon on their talon to guide out all of the other assault force aircraft out of North Vietnamese airspace. Cherry 02 is last out of the area, monitoring and jamming North Vietnamese ground control interception frequencies for their fighters. New South Wales Weasels battled with 16 SAM-2 firings, and Navy had 20 SAM-2s fired at them during their diversionary attacks, but without damage or loss. One wild weasel, the USAF one, suffers damage from a near miss by a SAM. The engine flames out due to fuel loss while they're in sight of a rescuing KC-135 tanker. The crew choose to glide into Laos, where they ejected 0315. They're guided by an overhead USAF Phantom, and are safely picked up by Apple 04 and 5 at first line. All the raid participants make it back safely to their bases. However, and understandably, the mood of all involved is sombre in the extreme. Over 6 hours of exhausting and deadly work, to hell and back from north, as one of them said. They are proud of their efforts, but many have tears of frustration, and some fear that the raid will lead to harsh reprisals against the POWs. In summary, let us not forget that this bold raid involved highly detailed planning, intense secrecy, new air and ground tactics and equipment, extensive training, and perfect coordination of the elements from the US Navy, Army and Air Force. And it all took place in 1970, subject, as I mentioned before, to the technological and other limitations that applied at the time. Yet the raid worked perfectly and almost exactly as planned. The exception was the mistaken landing of Apple 01 at secondary school. It appears that the pilot of Apple 01, the commander of an MHHV squadron at Edwin, had originally started in the command element of the raid planning group, and he had not participated in the night training at Edwin. In fact, he was probably the least experienced pilot in the mission, with no combat experience in the MHHV, and in hindsight, this concern should have been foreseen and the mistake could have been avoided. That said, it was perhaps fortuitous that his mistake resulted in the early elimination of any threat to the primary mission from the secondary school's Chinese and Vietnamese occupants without loss to the raiders. Neither, as I mentioned, neither the US nor China was keen to confirm that they had engaged in a firefight with troops from the other side. The raiding force penetrated North Vietnamese defences undetected, searched every prison building and returned safely to their home bases. The aircraft losses comprised only the crashed HH-3 and the Wild Weasel. Raiding force casualties were extremely light, with no deaths. One Green Beret suffered a grazed leg from an enemy bullet, and a USAF tech sergeant who was a crewman in the Banana 01 broke his ankle during the heavy crash landing, but he was still able to move and effect his duty while they were there. So, was there a security leak? After the war, a senior North Vietnamese officer who had been deputy chief of their general staff at the time of the raid categorically refuted stories that they had moved the prisoners following a security leak about the raid. He said that if the North had had any prior knowledge of the raid, they would have intercepted and destroyed the raiding force, not just moved the prisoners. He also confessed in his memoirs that this, the Son-tay raid, may well have been the most painful, most humiliating incident of my entire military career. Was there an actual failure in the intel ahead of the mission? The intel in the last days before the raid did note that activity levels in and around the camp had suggested POWs may have been moved, but SR-71 infrared imagery still showed that the camp was occupied. Some senior members of the intel community began to feel that the prison was not in use, but senior defence executives and the President wanted the raid to proceed even if there was only a faint chance of bringing some POWs home. Only after the release of POWs in 1973 was the US able to confirm that the POWs had been moved by the North Vietnamese in July beforehand, as the prison was being upgraded to remedy its security shortfalls. The POWs in black pyjamas noted in the prison grounds by US regular assets were in all probability the construction workers, who also wore black pyjamas. In regards to the conditions for the POWs, little definitive information on the conditions for the POWs emerged until Operation Homecoming in early 1973, when the first of 591 US POWs were released and brought home to a warm welcome. US millionaire Ross Perot funded a huge ticker tape parade for the POWs in San Francisco. And besides that, he offered an all-expenses-paid invitation to any of the Sonte raiders to come to San Francisco to personally and privately meet with the POWs that they tried to rescue. And many were able to make that trip. It was a very emotional reunion in the dining room of the Fairmont Hotel where the POWs embraced the raiders, explaining that there had been no reprisals for the raid. Indeed, the raid had had an unexpected but very beneficial roll-on effect for US POWs, most of whom had previously been held in remote rural areas in primitive conditions, often in solitary confinement. North Vietnam was seriously spooked at their own failure to detect the incoming raid, and this caused widespread embarrassment to the military. For security reasons then, the North Vietnamese subsequently chose to consolidate the POWs in shared cells in the Hanoi area. This brought them into contact with other POWs, boosting the conditions of their captivity, as well as their health and morale. The ability to communicate and to organise increased dramatically while they were in groups, such that in the so-called Hanoi Hilton, the POWs formed the 4th POW wing. The raiders at last had confirmation that their efforts had by no means been in vain. Indeed, one raider who attended quipped, "The Sonte raid finally ended in that hotel dining room." Just briefly on to another minute on comparisons. Comparisons between Sonte and the calamitous failure of Moran of the Eagle Claw raid in 1980 is just sad. Indeed, it's tragic. It took place just 10 years later, and yet so many of the key lessons from Sonte had been forgotten or ignored. The paranoia over secrecy affected far too many operational aspects of Eagle Claw. No full or combined rehearsals, pilots flying unfamiliar aircraft, no contingencies for bad weather, and more. To summarise, Sonte showed what could be achieved with a bold plan, using experts in every fighting element, exceptional training, rehearsed contingency plans, and tight security. Over 50 years and more, the world has seen many heroic attempts to find and recover hostages, POWs, or military folk lost behind enemy lines, whether in Vietnam, Entebbe, Munich, Iran, Gaza, or elsewhere. Some have worked and some have failed, but few have been as successful a failure as Sonte.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for David? Yes, at the back.
You mentioned, I think you said 7 that did a reconnaissance on the prisoner. Is this Americans going into North Vietnam?
Yes, it was. It was carried out by the Command and Control North element of the US Studies and Observation Group, one of the covert elements that were based, I think, in, I'm not sure, I think they were based in Thailand. And they were in fact inserted by helicopter, not too far away from Sonte. Made their way there on foot. Yes, I was quite surprised to find out about it. I know you know about it over there.
Sorry, yes.
Questions, please.
I'll actually make a couple of points. The group captain only found out last night at dinner that I'd actually visited Sonte several times during my Hanoi posting. So I promised not to interrupt him during the speech to say no, that's not correct. And actually, it's very, very accurate. To make a couple of very, very quick points. One, I've been very lucky. I saw the bottle of Barbara is in the Special Warfare Museum in Fort Bragg. I've taken the original plans out to Sonte, and they are accurate down to 6 feet. Despite the fact that compound, I was in there 2015 through 2017, different visits, despite it being on ruins, I can tell exactly where the buildings are. They are within 6 feet, probably even less than that. So it's incredibly accurate work on the image analysts. Second point, you talk about it there, that the unintended effect of the raid was to consolidate the TWs. The Vietnamese did learn a very painful lesson from that. A lot more anti-aircraft defences out there, so the raid was not defeatable. And that was probably the one thing that the task force commander, in retrospect, said, is that if I had known that that was going to be the effect, I would have, incorporated something different in the plan to So it had an unintended effect. And the final thing to bring it full circle is that most of the PWs at Sontai will move to another compound a couple of kilometres up the road, on the main road out from Hanoi, where they actually heard the raid take place. And it is still there. It is the Military Science College, and it's where ADS students to this day go for advanced Vietnamese language training. So exactly the wall that separates the language school and the thing over the compound right next door was the PW facility that they heard the raid from. So again, full circle. Thank you very much for
thank you very much for adding those extra points of interest.
Thank you. We have time for one question. If not, it's done. Well, I think Jason, one
simple question about your admiration for the C-130. Would it be fair to argue that the C-130 has probably brought more aid to the world than any other aircraft?
I think that's a very fair point, given that there's a few thousand of them in the circle have been, and we're talking about 50, more than 50 years, 60 years. Yeah, Australia, as I'm sure you all know, Australia was proudly only the second World Air Force to use C-130 after the US. There we go. Thanks.
David, again, you brought us an aspect of the Vietnam War that only one of us knew anything about. The rest of us were blissfully ignorant because, of course, we thought that all the POWs from Vietnam were rescued by Rambo in 1, 2, 3 and 4. But David, thank you very much indeed for your